If you've ever tried to set a boundary with someone who flips it on you, and that could be guilt trips, gaslighting, exploding, you may be dealing with a narcissist. And saying no to them, that's just not difficult. It can feel dangerous. Maybe you've experienced this. You finally work up the courage to say no to something that doesn't feel right. But instead of respect, you get, what? After everything I've done for you, you might even get the cold shoulder. They might go silent and tell you, no, nothing's wrong. And systematically, you start to feel crazy thinking, yeah, this must be in my head. They might even blow up at you, telling you you're being dramatic, ungrateful, selfish. And here's what happens next. You really do start questioning yourself. You start saying, maybe I'm too sensitive. Maybe I should just go along with it. It's not worth the fight. You start comparing yourself. What did others do? You even might start telling yourself, well, he had it better or she had it better in their other relationship, and I'm the problem. Here's the thing. If this pattern sounds familiar, you're not the problem. You're likely dealing with someone who doesn't recognize you have the right to boundaries in the first place, and they've never been told no. So today's episode is a follow-up to our conversation from Monday's episode about saying no in relationships. This time we're going deeper to one of the most challenging scenarios, how to say no to a narcissist and actually hold that boundary with. This episode will give you practical tools to hold your no with clarity and without compromise, because your peace of mind, it's non-negotiable. So good morning, beautiful people. Welcome to my channel, Unmute with Priya. I'm your host, Priya, and I help women in midlife navigate through this ridiculously intense period in our lives. So women 40 plus, when you're in perimenopause, menopause, ultimately to find your voice in relationships. Everything in our world is about relationships. So when you find your voice in relationships, it's not just about speaking up the words you're saying. It's about finding that inner voice, coming back to who you are. So it's non-negotiable. And I've been checking on some of the comments on some of my previous videos, and I noticed that there's comments that, well, women do this too. And so I want to say this, that if you're male watching this, if you're female, if you identify with being male or female, if I don't care, and if you resonate with the message, this applies to everyone. But I'm female. I can't speak to the male experience. So if this is resonating with you, just know this applies across the board. And there are other channels where it's men talking to men. But if you're catching this, obviously you're catching this because it's striking a chord that this pattern exists in your relationships. So keep watching, because like I said, it's not that I'm discounting you. It's just that I can only speak to the female experience in my experience. But yes, this does happen across the board. There are female narcissists. There's male narcissists. There are women who don't understand no, and males who don't understand no. It's across the board. So if you're here, keep listening and let's go. Let's dive deep. So I want to talk about why I decided to talk about narcissism to begin with. I am going to do a video on spiritual bypassing. So my journey in the past 5 years has been this deep, deep inward dive into understanding spirituality. And in this new age spirituality, there's a lot out there that can really mess you up. I want to say F you up, but I'm going to say mess you up, because you start to take on the burden of the responsibility in the relationship. You start to think, okay, well, if I'm nicer, if I emanate energy, there's a lot out there that can really confuse you. And that's what I was doing. I was discounting that narcissism even exists, even though it's a diagnosed personality disorder, because then I started to say, well, that's not nice. You're labeling someone. And as I sat with this for the past couple of days, I said, no, it exists. And these are the kind of relationships that I've called into my life. So I can speak to this about my experience, so that if you're watching this and you're in a relationship with a narcissist, or you too have attracted narcissistic people into your life throughout your life, you can start to set boundaries and clear boundaries so that you're not compromising yourself. So narcissism. It's not just about diagnosing someone, it's about recognizing patterns that help you protect yourself. Now, we all have narcissistic traits to some degree. I lost friendships because I stopped asking my friend, this was years ago, about what was going on in their life. And they had a lot of stuff going on, but my stuff was taking over. It was taking the space. And they ultimately emailed me saying this relationship's taken its toll on me. And yeah, if I reflect, I was being narcissistic in that relationship. I was making it all about me. But healthy narcissism, there is something called healthy narcissism, actually helps us have the confidence and self-worth. When we talk about narcissistic behavior that becomes harmful in relationships, we're looking at a different level entirely. So let's talk about the key traits of narcissistic behavior. And I used to watch this and I used to follow people on YouTube who talked about this kind of behavior. And here it would be right in my life. I would see it and I would discount it, saying, no, that couldn't be me. No, that's not that person. Being overly nice, that people pleasing quality. And we're going to go into what attracts. If you find that you're the type of person that's attracting narcissistic people into your life, we're going to go into what makes that happen. Because that was me. And why? What about me made that happen? So let's talk about narcissistic characteristics. They exaggerate their achievements and talents. They might constantly talk about how successful they are, how much people admire them, or how they're better than others at basically everything. They're super critical of others because they are the best at what they do in everything. And it could be multiple areas. It could be at the gym, it could be at work, it could be at life. It's not just confidence, it's an inflated sense of their own importance. They constantly crave praise and attention. They need to be the center of attention in conversations, relationships, even in group settings. If the spotlight shifts away from them, they find ways to bring it back. So think about that. Think about people that you're surrounded with. If there's that one person that's in the group that's constantly bringing it back to them, you might be dealing with a narcissist. They manipulate or exploit others. This is where it gets really damaging in relationships. They might use guilt, shame, or emotional manipulation to get what they want. And your feelings become tools for their agenda. They have difficulty recognizing or caring about others' feelings. And this doesn't mean that they can't understand emotions intellectually. Many narcissists are quite emotionally intelligent when it serves them. Think about that. Only when it serves them. But they struggle with genuine empathy, especially when it conflicts with their own needs. They react poorly to criticism or perceived slights. So even gentle feedback can trigger intense anger, defensiveness, retaliation. They might give you the silent treatment, explode in rage, or find ways to punish you for challenging their self-image. And I know with a person that was in my life, we would joke about this one thing. We had a funny name for each other. And one time I just called him that funny name. Meanwhile, we had said it to each other and broken out into hysterics each time. This time, he exploded in rage. I got silent treatment for the rest of the night. I had to prepare dinner for the people who were coming over. And I took the blame, thinking, oh, I shouldn't have said that. And then the other thing is their stuff trumps yours. Their stuff trumps yours, no matter how severe. I had a significant head injury. I really should have rested for a good 6 months, but I was back at it after 2 weeks. And the vertigo, the nausea, I mean, that's just the physical symptoms that I experienced, but talk about all the emotional stuff that I was going through. I had a frontal lobe head injury, so that just affected cognition, emotion, and I was calling hotlines to get help because nobody could understand what I was going through. And even with this head injury, this person had gotten into a slight car accident where they hurt their shoulder and it was fixed at a chiropractic visit, but that took precedence over my head injury. The fact that I could have died, the fact that I still could die because I hadn't gone to the doctor yet and I might be bleeding out, that little shoulder injury took precedence over my head injury. And in any situation where somebody was going through a condition, that could be, a friend could be going through cancer, or an autoimmune condition where their body was slowly deteriorating. This person always brought it back to their conditions. Whether it was their inability to connect with somebody or they wanted that spotlight back on them, I don't know. I don't care. But this is what those characteristics, that's how they show up when with a narcissist. So, so let's talk about how this shows up in relationships. How does it translate into relationship dynamics? Because this is where the rubber meets the road. One, and I kind of just already went into this a little bit, total lack of empathy. They often struggle to validate or respond compassionately to the partner's needs. If you're upset about something, instead of comfort, you might get you're being too sensitive, or that's not a big deal. You might not even get anything at all. Or you might get what I just described. They bring it back to the condition that they're facing. You start feeling like your feelings don't matter and you're asking for too much when you need basic emotional support. Basic emotional support, that's something we all need in our relationships. Whether it's at work and we're having a rough day, being able to go to your boss and be supported emotionally is a big deal. And so when you have this partner in your life and you're not getting emotional support, it can leave you feeling so rejected and so lonely. And some people say, you're better off being alone than in the relationship because you're more lonely being in that relationship. Second, let's talk about control and manipulation. They may gaslight you, making you question your own reality. This happened a lot to me. That never happened. And you're remembering it wrong. You're being crazy. They might guilt trip you after everything I've done for you. They play power games to maintain dominance in the relationship. And the partners often end up feeling confused, insecure, constantly doubting their own perceptions. So that control and manipulation is real. It is real. Even when I tried to bring things up to the surface, to the surface, to say, "Hey, this happened," instead of I apologize and trying to understand where I was coming from, I got total defensiveness and anger. And look at what I've done. Look at what I did. I showed up no matter what. I was sick and I showed up. And then that left me feeling like, yeah, I had done something wrong. Third, let's talk about the fragile ego. Explosive conflict, right? Here's the paradox. Narcissists often have incredibly fragile egos underneath that grandiose exterior. They're often extremely insecure. So that's why there's this inflated sense of self, because they're trying to compensate for that insecurity. They react strongly to criticism, real or imagined. And arguments escalate quickly because they can't handle being wrong. They can't handle being told something that might even insinuate that they're being wrong. And blame shifting is their specialty. It's their skill. Somehow everything becomes your fault. The fourth one, idealization and devaluation. This is really confusing and a big one in romantic relationships. Early on, they might put you on a pedestal, love bombing, saying, "Wow, I've never met anyone like you. Wow, this is amazing. All the other women I was with, they never did this. And look at you." And then eventually, they start to devalue you. You go from being perfect to being the problem. They might become cold, critical, or even discard you altogether when you no longer serve their needs. And that's exactly what happened to me. I started speaking up. I started advocating for myself. I started saying no. And they discarded me just like that. Now, that was my challenge, my healing journey. But it wasn't the first time that this person did it. They'd done it multiple times in their life. Fifth one here, difficulty with true intimacy. Genuine emotional vulnerability feels threatening to someone with narcissistic traits. They might share dramatic stories about themselves. Okay, I could tell you how many stories I heard. But real mutual vulnerability, deep, stable connection, it's often lacking. And the relationships become shallow or transactional. So let's talk about the impact this has on you. And if you've been in a relationship, friendship, workplace, intimate with someone like this, You probably recognize some of these impacts. You have chronic self-doubt and anxiety. You're constantly walking on eggshells, trying to avoid setting them off, and you second guess everything you say and do. Now, let's talk about loss of self-esteem. Over time, that constant criticism, the silence, the invalidation, the lack of support, it wears you down. And you start believing that maybe you're too sensitive, too demanding, and too much. When I would get into these relationships, I was at my best as far as confidence. I, you know, this last one, I was the fittest I had ever been. I was going to the gym all the time. I was eating well. I felt so good in myself. And what I ended up with at the end of that, complete disgust for myself. My self-esteem was at rock bottom low. I went from the most confident to the least confident in the span of 5 to 7 years. And as I talk about that, let's talk about how emotionally exhausting that is. It's draining to be in a relationship where your emotional needs constantly become second, even basic needs, where every boundary becomes a battle. And for many people, this can lead to trauma responses, sometimes complex PTSD from the ongoing emotional abuse. And a lot of the women that I speak to experience this. And I have quite a few male friends that have experienced this as well in their relationships. You might develop codependent tendencies, becoming so focused on managing their emotions that you lose touch with your own needs. I remember being in therapy and my therapist asking, Priya, what do you like to do? And I had no response. Prior to this, I was at the gym. I loved traveling. I loved going to the forest by myself, being on my bike. If I wanted to do something, I went and did it. And here I'm in therapy and my therapist is asking me this question and I had nothing. I said, I don't have anything. You become so focused on managing their emotions that you lose touch with your own needs. You lose touch with yourself. You lose touch with, hey, who am I? And the fear of leaving becomes overwhelming because you've been conditioned to believe that you can't trust your own judgment. Let's talk about, can narcissists change? Right? I mean, this is a question that everyone asks. And the honest answer is it's complicated. People with milder, I think there's a spectrum of this, but people with milder narcissistic traits can improve with genuine self-awareness and therapy. And I have a close friend of mine, and her husband was a true narcissist. All these characteristics. But deep down, there's such a ridiculous layer of insecurity and self-loathing. And they actually went to therapy to actually talk about this and face it head on and actually face it with their partner. And so things started to improve. Now, every so often, it rears its ugly head, but my friend speaks her mind, calls it out like it is, and that has made their relationship healthier. Here's the catch with this improvement. People with severe narcissistic patterns rarely seek help unless they're motivated by a crisis or external pressure. And even that, if there's a crisis or external pressure, they tend to move on from that and put their fingers in their ears, go, la, 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 I can't hear you. Even then, lasting change requires a genuine commitment to introspection, looking inward and building empathy, which goes against everything that their ego is designed to protect. Long-term change is possible, but it's difficult with them. And here's what's important. You can't love someone into changing. You can't set enough boundaries to make them respect you. And you can't be perfect enough to avoid their criticism. The only person that you can change and work on is yourself. And the only boundaries you can control are your own. So let's go into this part that I mentioned in the beginning. Why do we attract narcissists? This can be touchy because it forces us to look at ourselves. Why are we attracting narcissists? I did from every relationship that I've had has been with a narcissist. And I get into it and I would say, this looks familiar. This is familiar. Why is this familiar? And I wouldn't listen to my gut. and I would ignore it and ultimately get more entrenched in this relationship. And this isn't just romantic relationships. These are also friendships. So before we talk about how to say no to narcissists, I want to address a question that almost everyone asks themselves when they recognize these patterns. Why do I keep attracting these type of people? So let me be clear, recognizing these patterns isn't about self-blame. It's about self-awareness that leads to protecting yourself. Understanding why you might be targeted isn't about taking responsibility for someone else's harmful behavior. Let me say that again. Understanding why you might be targeted isn't about taking responsibility for someone else's harmful behavior. It's about empowering yourself with knowledge. So let's talk about your beautiful traits that make you vulnerable. You have high empathy and compassion. If you're someone with deep empathy, you're naturally drawn to people who seem wounded and misunderstood. I never understood this concept, but I remember as far back as being 7 years old and watching commercials that really tugged at your heartstrings and being just crying because I felt it. I could feel the pain of others at such a young age. So if you're someone with deep empathy, you're naturally drawn to people who seem wounded. Narcissists are often skilled at presenting themselves at having difficult pasts that explain their behavior. And they know how to trigger your compassion. I can say this is with 1,000%. Bring up their past to explain their behavior. And poor me. And they present it in such a way that you're sitting there thinking, oh my gosh, tugging at your heartstrings. They might say things like, no one has ever understood me like you do. I've been hurt so many times before. They might even say, my ex was crazy. She never got me. And your beautiful ability to see that hurt beneath someone's behavior becomes something that they can exploit. You think you're helping them heal, but they're using your empathy to avoid being accountable. Now, if you're also someone like me, you had people-pleasing tendencies. If you have a strong desire to make others happy and avoid conflict, you're incredibly attractive to someone who wants their needs prioritized above everyone and everything else. You'll bend over backwards to accommodate them at your own expense. There were things that happened in relationships, situations that should have made me run for the hills, should have made me say, that's it, done. But because of my people-pleasing tendencies, I wanted to be the nice girl, despite what had happened. And as I think about that right now, I'm thinking, Priya, what were you thinking? But I wasn't thinking at the time. It was just that, like I said, that nice girl tendency and people-pleasing tendency. Narcissists can sense this people-pleasing tendency. They test boundaries early. Small requests gradually escalate. And when you consistently say yes to things that don't feel right, they learn that you're someone who will prioritize their comfort over your own well-being. You might also be someone with poor boundary recognition, and that was me too. Sometimes we attract narcissists because we haven't learned to recognize what healthy boundaries look like, either in ourselves or others. And if you grew up in a family where boundaries were unclear or violated, non-existent, unhealthy relationship dynamics might actually feel familiar, even normal. You might think things like, all relationships require sacrifice. I've heard that so many times. Love means never saying no. If I really cared, I would just do this for them. There's also low self. So when your self-esteem is low, you accept treatment that others would immediately reject. You might think you don't deserve better, or that this is how relationships work. You might even feel grateful for the attention, even when it comes with strings attached. And narcissists can spot low self-esteem from a mile away. They know exactly how to make you feel special, like the only person in the room, and chosen. And then they gradually erode your confidence until you feel lucky to have them at all. Oh, I'm so lucky to have you because you stuck around in spite of this. There's also the trauma connection. Let's talk about a little bit about trauma bonding. Some of you may have heard this term. So if you experienced inconsistent love or attention in childhood, sometimes getting intense affection, or sometimes getting neglect or criticism, or none of that. Maybe it was muted in your home. So you never knew what normal felt like. You might unconsciously seek that familiar pattern. Narcissists provide intermittent reinforcements. What I mean by that is love bombing followed by devaluing you, intense connection followed by withdrawal. If this pattern feels familiar, your nervous system might actually interpret it as love. Now, this is true for me. Narcissists often target people during vulnerable periods, after a breakup, job loss, death in the family, or other major life changes when your defenses are down. They position themselves as your savior during that difficult time, making you feel indebted to them. You might have a fixer mentality. If you believe you can help or heal someone through love and patience, you might stay in relationships longer than you should. And this is where spiritual bypassing comes in, especially with the New Age movement, telling you, well, if you change yourself, then that relationship is going to change. Or they're just a reflection of you. So then you think, okay, well, I must be a really horrible person inside if they are horrible. You think if I just love them enough, if I'm just patient enough, they'll change. And this gives narcissists time to establish control, to make you dependent, however that looks, emotionally, financially, to isolate you from your support system. As I talk about, in these periods of times when I was with narcissists, whether it was a friendship and most often in romantic relationships, I was at my highest when they met me. By the end, I was completely isolated from my support system. They never said, don't go hang out with your friends, but it was slow and systematic that I became isolated. And I didn't really have anybody to talk to because I lost that sense of who I was and what was happening in my reality. So I want to talk about breaking the pattern. We've gone into some deep stuff just now, talking about what is a narcissist, and then also talking about what can attract a narcissist into our lives. So breaking the pattern. Here's what I want you to understand. The traits that make you vulnerable to narcissists, your empathy, your compassion, your desire to help, your capacity for deep love, they're not flaws. They are your gifts. They are your superpowers. And the goal isn't to become cold or closed off. The goal is to learn how to protect these beautiful qualities, these gifts, while developing stronger boundaries and having self-worth that is so unshakable. When you start valuing yourself as much as you value others, when you start recognizing that your needs matter just as much as everyone else's, when you start trusting your instincts instead of explaining them away, then that's when the pattern breaks. You don't attract narcissists because there's something wrong with you. You attract them because there's something beautiful about you that they want. They want access to that. The work isn't to dim your light. It's to protect it. So let's go into the meat of this. Now that we understand what we're dealing with, let's talk about why saying no to someone with narcissistic traits feels so different and why it's so difficult compared to setting boundaries with emotionally healthy people. If yesterday I was supposed to go to the movies with a friend, then I had committed to it probably about 3 or 4 hours before, earlier in the day. And it got closer to the time that we were going to go to the movies. And I just wasn't feeling okay. I wasn't feeling well. I was going to force myself to go. And then I said, no, I need to stay home tonight. And I texted my friend and told her, I think I need to stay home another time. And that was the end of it. Feel better. That was it. That's not what I would experience with a narcissist. Setting that kind of boundary with an emotionally unhealthy person would skyrocket into drama. Narcissists perceive boundaries as rejection. To a narcissist, your boundary isn't just, I need some space, or that doesn't work for me, or no, I can't go out tonight. It's a personal attack on their sense of self. They experience your no as rejection, abandonment, criticism of their worth as a person. Think about it. If someone's entire identity depended on being special, being in control, being the exception to every rule, then your boundary threatens that entire reality for them. They thrive on control, attention, and emotional access. So narcissists need you to feel like they've unlimited access to you, your time, your energy, your emotional responses. You can reach out to them and they're not going to respond, but they need to have access to you. So they can't control the narrative in that respect because they know when they reach out to you, you're going to be there. And when you say no, you're essentially saying, you don't get to control this part of my life. And that's absolutely terrifying to someone whose sense of safety comes from being in control. They also thrive on emotional reactions. Whether it's positive attention or negative drama, they want to know that they can affect you. And a calm, firm no doesn't give them the emotional supply they're looking for. I remember an instance right after my head injury, and I didn't set a boundary. So I came home after a long trip. They were in my house, and I just didn't want them in my house. I didn't know how to say I need this space to myself. I was trying to communicate because I was sitting by myself. I had just had a healing session too. And they confronted me because I wasn't sitting with them. They confronted me because I wasn't giving them the attention. And I blew up. I absolutely blew up. Talk about an emotional reaction. I didn't even recognize myself in that moment, but it was from being silenced. It was from staying muted and not having a voice in that relationship that it just exploded. And this person, you should have seen the look of joy on their face. It was a smile, a snide smile looking at me while I'm struggling, saying, look at you right now. A caring person won't do that to you. A caring person will hold you and say, what do you need right now? So your no threatens their false reality. Here's the thing that took me years to understand. Narcissists live in a constructed reality where they're in charge. Everyone else exists to accommodate them. And your boundary doesn't just inconvenience them, it challenges the story that they tell themselves about how the world works. And in their world, you should be grateful for their attention. You should prioritize their needs. You should understand that they're special and deserve different treatment. And when you say no, you're essentially saying, I don't agree with that story. And that damages them. So here's an important truth. They don't recognize your autonomy. This is the heart of it. Narcissists don't respect your no because they don't truly recognize your autonomy. To them, you're not a separate person with your own valid needs and boundaries. You're an extension of them. You're a supporting character in their story. And that's why you can't talk to them with logic. This is why explaining your reasons doesn't help. This is why being nicer about it doesn't make it more accepting. You could have the most reasonable boundary in the world expressed in the kindest possible way, and they'll still react as if you've personally attacked them. Because in their mind, guess what? You have. Let's talk about emotional hijacking. When you try to set a boundary with a narcissist, they often respond with what I call emotional hijacking. They escalate so quickly and so intensely that you forget what you were even trying to protect in the first place. You forget what you brought to the surface or a situation that you wanted to talk about. You forget. They took up your space. And so suddenly, instead of discussing your boundary, you're defending against your accusations of being selfish, ungrateful, cruel, not caring enough. Then you move from, I want to express myself, I want to talk about this, to you're being in damage control, trying to manage their emotions, trying to prove you're not the terrible person they're making you out to be. And here's what happens. You abandon your boundary to deal with their emotional crisis. They've successfully made their reaction your responsibility. And this is why saying no to a narcissist feels so different, because with healthy people, a no might lead to disappointment, maybe some negotiation, but there's ultimate respect for your decision. And with a narcissist, your no becomes essentially ground zero for an emotional battlefield where your right to have boundaries is the casualty. So let's talk about the 3 most common reactions you'll get. Let's get specific. When you say no to someone with narcissistic traits, their reactions are pretty predictable. And understanding these patterns help you prepare mentally and emotionally so you don't get caught off guard. So the first reaction, the guilt trips. After everything I've done for you, I can't believe you're being so selfish. No one has ever treated me this way. I guess I know where I stand with you. Have you heard that one before? That's emotional manipulation 101. They're trying to make you feel guilty for having a boundary by reminding you of their past kindness or by positioning themselves as the victim. And the guilt trip often comes with a history lesson. All the times they helped you, all the sacrifices they made, all the ways they've been good to you. And what they're telling you is pretty clear. You owe them compliance. You need to be a good girl or boy in this relationship. And sometimes it's more subtle. Heavy sighs, facial expressions, comments about how disappointed they are. I just need time to process this. They're not processing it. They're trying to figure out why they feel so bad and rejected. They want you to feel like you're hurting them by protecting yourself. So let's talk about reaction 2, gaslighting. You're being dramatic. That's not what I said. That's not what I did. You're too sensitive. You're remembering it wrong. Oh, and this one. This is nails on a chalkboard for me. I was just joking. Can't you take a joke? Gaslighting is designed to make you question your own reality. They're not just disagreeing with your boundary. They're telling you that your reasons for having the boundary aren't valid, it didn't happen, or you're a product of your own mental instability. This is insidious. It's hidden because it attacks your ability to trust yourself. If you can't trust yourself and your own perceptions, how can you maintain boundaries? If you're too sensitive, maybe you don't deserve to have limits. That's what you start to think. And then they start to rewrite history. I never said that. Or you're taking that out of context. You're being paranoid. And the goal is to make you doubt whether you have the right to be upset. And especially if there was an incident that happened. Forget about things that are said. There's an incident that happened and they say, no, that didn't. So nonchalantly. You really start to question that. But I'll tell you one thing. Your body remembers. Your body, you know the truth. Let's talk about reaction 3, rage or cold silence. You might have the explosion, yelling, accusations, personal attacks, threats to leave, or threats about consequences you'll face for disrespecting them. Or, which was in my situation, complete withdrawal. Silent treatment, acting like you don't exist. Making you feel like their displeasure through cold shoulders and emotional abandonment. Both are forms of punishment. And the message is clear. This is what happens when you don't comply with my wishes. They're trying to train you to avoid setting boundaries by making the consequences feel worse than just giving in. And if you experience the rage, it might feel scary, of course. If you've unleashed something dangerous, like you've unleashed something dangerous. And the silent might feel worse, like you've lost them forever. And both are designed to make you come crawling back, apologizing for having the audacity to say no. So here is the reframe that you need. These reactions, the guilt trips, the gaslighting, the rage, the silence, they're not signs that you've done something wrong. They're proof that your boundary worked. Think about it. If someone responds to your reasonable boundary with emotional manipulation, that tells you everything you need to know about how they view that relationship. Healthy people might be disappointed by your no, but they don't punish you for it. And when someone reacts this intensely to your boundary, they're showing you that they never saw you as an equal partner with valid needs. They saw you as someone who exists to meet their needs. And this, like I said, doesn't just apply in intimate relationships, partnerships. This is also in friendships. In a friendship that I would say has fizzled out, I'm no longer in contact with this person, I set a boundary. I actually advocated for myself. I spoke up because I didn't like the way the previous conversation went. And I specifically said my opinion of what had happened, and that was wrong. From that point on, I didn't hear from that person. If I did hear from them, it was to disconnect me from their life slowly. Hey, delete me from this. Hey, delete me from that. And I would put out feelers here and there. Hey, let's get together for coffee for your birthday. Let's. That's the response I got. So yeah, it was painful for a little bit. But once I was able to process that this is actually a gift, that this person is no longer in my life, I was able to see and praise myself for setting that boundary. Here's what I want you to know. Their reaction is information. It's not your fault. It's not something you need to fix. And it's not a reason to abandon your boundary. Your boundary is the truth. Their reaction is not your responsibility. So let's talk about what I wanted to talk about in the beginning, how to hold your no. How do you actually hold your ground when someone is using guilt, manipulation, emotional warfare to tear down your boundaries? Here's the first thing. Keep it clear, not justified. And that's the most important strategy that I feel. And it's also the hardest one for people pleasers to implement. Say, that doesn't work for me. Say, I'm not available for that. Say, I'm not participating in this conversation. But definitely try not to say, this is like a muscle. It's going to take some time. I just feel like maybe it's not the right time because I'm really stressed at work and my therapist said I should focus on this. I don't want to hurt your feelings, but no, that doesn't work for me. I'm not available for that. And here's why it matters to say it in that way. Narcissists twist your explanations. That's ever happened to you. They take your explanation and then they make another story that then you start to believe. Don't feed them details to use against you. And every reason that you give becomes ammunition. If you say that you're too stressed, if they'll tell you they're more stressed. If you mention your therapist, they'll talk about therapy and your therapist. If you say you don't want to hurt their feelings, they say you already have. So just remember your boundary doesn't need justification that they need to approve of. It just needs to be clear and final, and you need to be fine with it. So practice this language. Say, I've decided not to. That won't work for me. I'm not comfortable with that. I'm not available. I won't be doing that. Notice there's no because in any of these statements, no room for negotiation or debate. And here's strategy 2, using the broken record technique. When they push back, and they will, you repeat your boundary calmly without adding new information, without getting drawn into their arguments. This one is so powerful. And the first time I saw it work, this one is so amazing. When I saw it in action, I had actually tried it out and it was actually working. I could not believe the results I was getting. So an example conversation of this is, let's say they say, but you said you'd help me with this. You, I'm not available for that. Them, I don't understand why you're being like this. You say, I'm not available for that. And they might say, after everything I've done for you, this is how you treat me. You, I'm not available for that. The key is to stay calm and keep repeating your boundary without taking the bait. Don't defend it. Don't explain it further. Don't apologize for it. I even tried this with someone who always escalated, always raised their voice. And I used to feed into it, and then it was a battle. And instead, one time I just decided to try this method, and I said, why are you yelling? I'm not yelling. And they continued to yell a lot. So why are you yelling? They did it again. We went probably about 5 rounds of this. All I kept saying is, why are you yelling? By the end of it, they had backed down. They said, I'm not yelling. I'm just trying to talk to you. And in that dynamic, that person doesn't yell at me anymore. That person actually has conversations with me because I set this boundary. The third strategy, have an exit plan. If you're dealing with someone who escalates to rage or becomes threatening when you set boundaries, you need to have a safety plan. So before you set the boundary, how are you going to end a conversation if it gets out of hand? Where can you go if you need to leave? Who can you call for support? And what are you going to do if they try to continue the argument via text or phone? Your exit script might be, let's stop this conversation. I'll connect with you another time. Or I can see you're upset. We'll talk when we're calmer. Or I'm ending this conversation now. And then you actually follow through. You don't get pulled back by protests or escalation. You leave the room, hang up the phone. You don't have to be nice and say, okay, I'll talk to you later. Bye. Stop responding to texts. They will do everything they can to spin it so that they feel better about themselves. Strategy 4 is document everything. This might sound dramatic, but if you're dealing with someone who gaslights or tries to rewrite history, keep records, save text messages, write down what was said and when. And it's not about building a legal case. It's about maintaining your sanity and your grip on reality. And so when they say, I never said that, you'll have the evidence. When they say, nah, you're remembering that wrong, you'll know the truth. And the documentation is for you to help trust yourself. So I started doing this as well. So when these people were telling me, I never happened. No, I never said that. I could open up my book and it was confirmation for myself that I'm not going crazy, that this actually did happen. Strategy 5, find your support system. You can't do this alone. So setting boundaries with a narcissist is emotionally exhausting, and they're skilled at making you doubt yourself. You need people in your corner who can reflect reality back to you. And you don't need a ton of people. You need even just one solid person. This could be a therapist who understands narcissistic abuse, friends who've witnessed the dynamic and have been there all along with you as you've talked to them about things, support group, family members who can offer perspective, and share your experiences with people you trust. Let them remind you that your boundaries are reasonable when you start to doubt yourself. And strategy 6, manage your own emotional state. So before, during, and after setting boundaries with a narcissist, you need to be intentional about your emotional regulation. So before, ground yourself. You're going to remind yourself why that boundary is important. Take some breaths if you can. Feel your feet on the ground. During, just focus on being grounded. Keep your voice steady. As much as you can, don't match their emotional intensity. And then after, talk to someone. Do something nurturing for yourself. Don't ruminate on their reaction or try to figure out how to make them understand or waste so much time trying to figure out what they must be thinking. Strategy 7, accept that they won't like it. This is the hardest part for recovering people pleasers like me. You have to be okay with their disapproval. They're not going to say, you know what, you're right. Thank you for the healthy boundary. Thank you for showing me this. They're going to make you pay for it in whatever way they can. So your measure of success can't be their approval. Your measure of success has to be at your own peace, your own integrity, your own well-being, your own knowing. And just remember, you're not setting boundaries to change them. You're setting boundaries to protect you. One of the greatest phrases that I often say in any dynamic now is, if I've had an experience with someone, I say to them, well, my experience of you is that you put me down whenever I try to speak up. It's the end of the conversation. They can't take that away from me because it's been my experience. I often get silence after that. So that's another technique that you can try. My experience of you is. Don't expect validation from these people. I want to address something that trips up so many people that I know. It tripped me up. When they start setting boundaries with narcissistic individuals, the expectation that if you do it just right, they'll understand and respect your limits. They might even come back and apologize. They'll want to talk to you. Your boundary is the truth. Their reaction is not your responsibility. I'm going to say that again. Your boundary is the truth. Their reaction is not your responsibility. So like I said, they won't thank you. They don't thank you for boundaries. They don't say, I appreciate you for being clear about your limits. They don't have moments of clarity where they suddenly realize they've been unfair, or they can actually reflect on their mistreatment. And in fact, the clearer and firmer your boundary is, the harder they're likely to push back. This isn't a sign that you're doing it wrong. It's a sign that your boundary's working. Think of it this way. If someone has been getting unlimited access to your time, energy, and emotional resources, of course they're going to be upset when you install some gates and you put a code lock on there. But upset doesn't mean the gates are wrong. Many people get stuck in what I call the approval trap. They think if I can just explain it better, if I can just help them understand, if I can just be nicer about it. But this misses the issue, fundamental issue. Problem isn't that they don't understand your boundary. The problem is that they don't respect that you have a right to one. You could have a PhD in communication, deliver your boundary with perfect kindness, clarity, provide a detailed rationale that would convince any reasonable person, and they'll still react as if you've personally attacked them, because to them, you have. So what I want you to do is measure your success by your peace, not their approval. How do we do that? You're going to tune into how much more peaceful you feel inside, how much mental energy you're conserving, how much more time you have for things that matter to you. This is a big one. How much stronger your sense of the self is becoming. Are you building that confidence? How much less you're walking on eggshells? If you're waiting for them to validate your boundary before you feel good about it, you're going to be waiting forever. This is something that I learned the hard way. I was consuming so much mental energy waiting. And that's what they're counting on, that you're going to wait forever. So setting boundaries with a narcissist isn't a one-time conversation. It's a consistent practice, kind of like meditation, or protecting your energy and refusing to engage in their emotional manipulation. It's like a muscle. It takes practice. And the more you do it, the more that muscle builds. Some will eventually back off when they realize you're not going to be moved by their tactics. And others may escalate for a while before finding easier targets. Others will try and test your boundaries. Ghost you, reach out. Ghost you, reach out. And that's just showing you there's an utter lack of respect for your boundaries. You'll need to remove them from your life entirely, which is what I did just recently. But here's what I know for sure. The alternative living without boundaries, constantly accommodating someone who doesn't respect you, it's not sustainable. It will drain your life force. It will dim your light and steal your joy. We've got every day to live. We die once. So we need to start making those days that we live filled with things that are going to light us up, that are going to enhance our joy, that are going to expand our light, fill our life force, and give us even more energy. You deserve to take up space. You deserve to have needs, and you deserve to be treated with respect. And you don't need anyone's permission to protect those things. So as we wrap up today's conversation, I want to leave you with the truth that changed everything for me. You don't set boundaries to change a narcissist. You set boundaries to protect yourself. If you've been in a relationship, romantic, family, friendship, or professional, where you feel like you're constantly walking on eggshells, where your needs consistently come last, where saying no feels dangerous, think about whether it's time to stop negotiating your worth. When you start holding firm boundaries with people who don't respect them, something beautiful happens. You start remembering who you are underneath all that people pleasing and accommodation, all of that stuff you've done your whole life. That's exactly what happened to me. I started to remember who I was. You start sleeping better. This was huge. Didn't realize how bad my sleep was until I actually started sleeping better and I started waking up so rested. You stop being constantly worried about managing someone else's emotions. And if they're lying next to you, worrying, what kind of state are they going to wake up in the morning? You have more energy because you're not pouring it into a bottomless pit of someone else's neediness. And you start trusting yourself again because you're honoring your own instincts instead of second guessing them constantly. Here's the unexpected gift. When you stop accepting poor treatment from one person, you'll naturally start recognizing it and rejecting it from others. Your boundaries become stronger across all your relationships, and that's beautiful. And I want to speak directly to those of you who are thinking, but what if they change? What if they get better? What if I'm giving up on them? Your compassion is beautiful, but it is misdirected if it's coming at the expense of your own well-being. I did this for years. You can't love someone into emotional health. You can't boundary them into respecting you. You cannot sacrifice yourself on the altar of someone else's growth. Most loving thing that you can do for both you is to model what healthy relationships. And the most loving thing that you can do for both of you is to model what healthy relationships look like by refusing to participate in unhealthy ones. So if this conversation has resonated with you, if you're recognizing patterns that have been playing out in your own life, I want you to know that change is possible. You can learn to set boundaries that stick. You can reclaim your voice, unmute yourself. You can find your peace and your power. And you don't have to do it all alone. So if you've been walking on eggshells for years, if you're tired of your needs coming last, you try to speak up and you're dismissed, you're not heard, you're not seen. If you're ready to stop negotiating your worth, I want to invite you to apply for a free 20-minute coaching call with me. The link is below. You can apply at www.unmutewithpriya.com. And you'll also get access to a free training, Finding Your Voice, 4 steps to finding your voice in relationships. And if you apply for that coaching call, we'll identify the specific patterns that are keeping you stuck and create a clear action plan for your next steps. And if you're ready to dive even deeper to do the real transformational work of rebuilding your relationship with yourself and your boundaries, I want to invite you to join me at the Paradise Within Retreat, September 27th through the 29th in Gallup, New Mexico. It's not just about a weekend away. It's a container for you to rebuild your voice, heal your nervous system, and create boundaries that actually protect your peace so you can actually start living a joyful life every day. And you can learn more in the application below. And final thought, just remember your boundaries aren't mean. They're not selfish and they don't require anyone else's approval. Protect your peace. Prioritize your well-being. Say no without explanation, justification, or apology. If someone in your life can't handle that, well, that tells you everything you need to know about that person and how they see you. So if this episode resonated with you, if there's something that you're dealing with in your life that you're stuck with, or if you've been able to move beyond a relationship with a narcissist, drop it in the comments. You'll be surprised at how much the comments will help someone else. And I don't care. This is for anyone, regardless of gender. And thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next episode.